My brother pointed at me in front of our entire family and said, "You stole my necklace." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I looked at him, waiting for him to smile or laugh. He didn't. Instead, he opened his hand and showed everyone an empty jewelry box. My stomach dropped. My parents were sitting across from me at the dining table. My mother, Corinne, stared at me with confusion. My father, Hollis, leaned back in his chair and folded his arm. Then Brennan said, "It's gone." And she was the last person near my room. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I asked. Brennan looked hurt. Why would I make something like this up? I wanted to laugh because the whole thing sounded ridiculous. But when I looked at my parents, I realized nobody was laughing. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I took a slow breath. "I didn't take your necklace." Brennan shook his head. "You were upstairs yesterday. So were you." "I wasn't in my room when it disappeared." "That doesn't mean I took it." My mother interrupted before I could say anything else. "Then Marlo, where were you?" I stared at her. It wasn't the question itself that hurt. It was the way she asked it, as if I was already the one who needed to explain myself. "I was helping Dad with the boxes in the garage," I said. "After that, I went to my room." Hollis nodded slightly. "I remember that. For a moment, I thought that would help." It didn't. Brennan leaned forward. "You also asked me about the necklace a few weeks ago." I frowned. "I asked what it was worth because you wouldn't stop talking about it. That's completely different." He looked toward our parents. "See?" She knew exactly what it was worth. My chest tightened. I had moved back into my parents' house because life had gotten difficult. I was already embarrassed about needing their help. Now Brennan was using that against me. "Why would I steal from you?" I asked. He shrugged. "You needed money." The room went silent. That sentence hurt more than the accusation. My father looked at me, and my mother lowered her eyes. I suddenly understood that Brennan hadn't brought this up because he wanted help finding his necklace. He had waited until both our parents were there because he wanted witnesses. He wanted me cornered. Then he looked directly at me and said, "If you didn't steal it, why are you acting so defensive?" That was the moment something inside me changed. I stopped trying to understand why my brother would accuse me. I started wondering why he had planned it so carefully. And for the first time, I realized Brennan wasn't trying to find a necklace. He was trying to make my own family believe I was a liar. Brennan didn't let the accusation end with dinner. The next morning, he was already telling my parents more details about the necklace. He said he had last seen it in his bedroom 2 nights before. According to him, it had been inside a small box on his dresser. I listened from the kitchen doorway. "Then when did you notice it was gone?" I asked. "Yesterday afternoon," he replied. His answer came too quickly. He then reminded Mom and Dad about the conversation we'd had weeks earlier. He said I had asked how much the necklace was worth. "That makes her question more important now," Brennan said. I couldn't believe how easily he was changing an ordinary conversation into something suspicious. "You showed me a picture of it," I said. "You were the one bragging about how expensive it might be." Brennan shook his head. "You asked me because you wanted to know its value." "No. You were talking about it while we were in the kitchen." He looked at Dad. "That's what she says now." I felt my hands tighten. Then Brennan said the thing that hurt the most. "She needed money." Nobody answered. He continued. "She doesn't have a job that pays enough right now. She needed somewhere to live. Maybe she thought selling it would solve her problem." I stared at him. I could understand being accused. I could understand suspicion. But my own brother had decided that my financial problems made me capable of stealing from. Dad suddenly stood up. "I want to look at your room, Marlo." I stepped back. "Why?" "Because we need to clear this up." I didn't agree, but Dad walked past me anyway. He opened drawers, checked under clothes, and looked through the small storage boxes beside my bed. Mom stood near the doorway while Brennan watched from the hall. Nothing was found. Dad finally turned around. "There's nothing here." Brennan didn't look disappointed. Instead, he said, "She could have put it somewhere else." I looked at him carefully. "You're saying I stole it, but you won't even check your own room?" "I already know it's not there." "That makes no sense." He shrugged. "Because I know what I saw." Something about his behavior bothered me. He wasn't acting like someone who had lost something valuable. He wasn't worried. He wasn't frustrated. He looked almost excited. That night, I opened the notes app on my phone and started writing down every detail I could remember. What Brennan said. When he said it. What Mom and Dad said. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information, but I knew I couldn't trust my memory if this continued. Before bed, Mom came into my room. She sat beside me and quietly said, "Marlo, if you did take it, just admit it. We can figure everything out." I looked at her. She wasn't asking me to prove I was innocent. She was asking me to confess. That was when I realized my parents weren't searching for the truth anymore. They were searching for a confession. The next evening, Brennan came downstairs holding something between two fingers. I found this near the dresser, he said. It was a small piece of fabric from one of my old sweaters. I stared at it. That doesn't prove anything. Brennan looked at Dad. It was right next to where I kept the necklace. I shook my head. I haven't even been inside your room. You were near my room. Being near your door isn't the same as going inside. Brennan's expression changed. You always have an answer. Because you're accusing me of something I didn't do. He slammed his hand against the table. Stop twisting everything. I stepped back, shocked by how quickly he had become angry. Dad immediately looked at me. Enough, Marlowe. I turned toward him. I'm not the one yelling. You're making this worse by accusing Brennan of lying. I couldn't believe it. So I'm supposed to stay quiet while he keeps adding new stories? Brennan crossed his arms. I told you what happened. No, I said. You told us different things every day. His face went pale. I looked at him directly. You said you saw me near your room 2 nights ago. Then you said you saw me yesterday. Which one is it? Brennan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. You said you noticed the necklace missing yesterday afternoon, but you also said you knew it was gone before. And now you're saying you found my sweater near your dresser. Brennan stared at me. Then suddenly his eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to believe she could do this to me, he whispered. Mom rushed toward him. Brennan, come here. She hugged him while he covered his face. I stood there in silence. It was so obvious to me. He had no answer, so he changed the situation. A few seconds earlier, he had been angry. Now he was the hurt brother whose feelings needed protecting. Dad looked at me with disappointment. You need to apologize. For what? For accusing your brother and causing all this. I won't apologize for telling the truth. Dad's voice became firm. Then admit you took the necklace. I didn't. Then you need to leave. My heart stopped. I looked at Mom, hoping she would say something. She didn't. I went upstairs and packed a suitcase. I took some clothes, my wallet, my phone, and a few things that belonged to me. I stood in my childhood bedroom for a moment, staring at the walls. This was the room where I had grown up. The place where I once believed I would always be safe. Now I was being forced out because my brother had told a story and my parents had chosen to believe it. I carried my suitcase downstairs. Nobody stopped me. Outside, I put everything into my car and closed the trunk. Once I was inside, I finally broke down. I cried until my chest hurt. But after a while, the tears slowed. The sadness was still there. Something else had started growing underneath it. Anger. I wiped my face and looked toward the house. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life begging people who betrayed me to believe me. If they wanted to believe Brennan, that was their choice. But one day, they were going to learn the truth. Tessa Calder opened her apartment door before I could knock twice. She looked at my suitcase, then at my face. You can stay here, she said. I didn't have the energy to explain everything. Tessa had worked with me years earlier, and she was one of the few people I trusted. She gave me the spare room without asking me to defend myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brennan. Then I remembered something. For the past few weeks, he had asked strange questions about my money. He had wanted to know how much I had saved and whether I was planning to stay with our parents for long. At the time, I thought he was simply being nosy. Now those questions felt different. I picked up my phone and searched through my old messages. My hand stopped when I found one from Brennan. It was from several days before he claimed the necklace had disappeared. He had written, "That necklace is worth more than you think." I stared at the message. Why would he mention it before the date he said he last saw it? I kept scrolling. There were other messages from around the same time. Nothing directly admitted what he had done, but together they made me uncomfortable. Then I remembered something else. A few days before the accusation, Brennan had asked me to help clean a storage cabinet near his bedroom. He had acted like it was no big deal. Now I wondered why he had specifically wanted me near that area. Had he been trying to make it look like I had been there? I didn't know, and I wasn't going to accuse him without proof. I had learned enough to know that guessing would only help him. So I started writing down facts, dates, messages, conversations, anything that seemed important. The next morning, I called the jeweler who had appraised Brennan's necklace before. The jeweler remembered it. I explained that I was trying to understand what had happened and asked whether Brennan had contacted them recently. There was a short pause. Then the jeweler said something that made my heart beat faster. Yes, he called recently about replacing the clasp. I sat completely still. Do you remember when? The jeweler gave me the date. It was shortly before Brennan claimed the necklace had disappeared. I thanked him and ended the call. I looked at my notes again. Brennan had been asking questions about my money. He had asked how long I planned to stay with our parents. He had mentioned the necklace before it supposedly went missing. He had recently handled the necklace. And he had deliberately brought me near the storage area beside his room. None of those things proved everything. But together, they changed the way I saw the situation. I had thought Brennan accused me because he believed I had stolen something. Now I wasn't sure he had ever believed that. Maybe he had planned the accusation first. Maybe the missing necklace was only the excuse. And if that was true, I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with someone who had prepared a story before destroying my place in the family. Tessa and I spent most of the next evening going through the old family papers I had brought with me. I wasn't looking for anything that would magically prove Brennan had lied. I wanted to understand why he had chosen me. While sorting through the papers, I found an old document with my grandmother's name on it. It explained that she had left several pieces of jewelry to the family. I knew about the jewelry, but I had never known how valuable some of it had become. One document showed a recent appraisal. The necklace Brennan claimed was missing was worth far more than I had ever imagined. I sat back in the chair. That explained why Brennan cared about it, but it didn't explain why he had accused me. Tessa noticed another document. What's this? It was a note about family property. Brennan's name appeared several times. I remembered hearing my parents mention that Brennan had been asking to handle some of the paperwork connected to the property. He had told them he could make things easier for. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. Now I did. I thought about my grandmother. She had trusted me with some of her important family documents before she died. She always said I was careful and wouldn't lose things. Brennan had never liked that. I remembered him making jokes about how Grandma trusted me with everything. I had thought he was teasing. Maybe he wasn't. Tessa helped me put the pieces in order. Then I found another problem with Brennan's story. He had told my parents the necklace was kept in a locked box. But I remembered him telling me something completely different months earlier. He had said the box was kept in a drawer. I showed Tessa the notes. She looked at me. That's another change in his story. I nodded. There was still something that bothered me. If Brennan really wanted the necklace's money, why go through all this? He could have simply sold it or asked our parents for help. Instead, he had accused me. Then I understood. Maybe the necklace wasn't his main goal. Maybe I was. If Brennan wanted control over the family property and paperwork, I could become a problem for him. I knew how my grandmother had arranged certain things. I also knew where some of the important documents were. But if everyone believed I was dishonest, my word would mean nothing. Anything I said about Brennan could be dismissed as anger. He could simply tell everyone I was trying to get revenge because they had kicked me out. The thought made me feel sick. He hadn't only tried to make me look like a thief. He had tried to destroy my credibility. I closed the folder. For the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel desperate to convince my parents. I was done chasing their belief. Brennan thought his plan had worked. I decided to let him believe that. From that moment on, I wasn't going to defend myself blindly. I was going to find out exactly what he had planned and make sure the truth had nowhere left to hide. The weeks after I left home were harder than I expected, but they also changed me. I stopped waiting for my parents to call. Instead, I took extra shifts, saved every dollar I could, and slowly built my life back. I found a small place of my own and started paying my bills without anyone's help. My parents barely contacted me. Brennan did, though. Every few days, he sent short messages telling me that I should apologize and stop making the family situation worse. I never answered. I had nothing to apologize for. Then one afternoon, Tessa came home looking unusually serious. "There's something you need to know," she said. She told me that someone she knew had mentioned Brennan while discussing a piece of jewelry he was trying to sell through another person. I immediately thought about the necklace. I didn't react. Instead, I asked Tessa what she knew. The description was close enough to make my stomach tighten. The piece was an older necklace with a distinctive design and an expensive stone. It sounded exactly like Brennan's necklace. But I wasn't going to accuse him based on a description. I needed facts. I started checking what could be verified without breaking any rules or invading anyone's privacy. One thing stood out. There was no official report that the necklace had been stolen. No police report. No insurance claim. Nothing outside the family that showed Brennan had actually reported it missing. That bothered me more than I expected. If someone had really lost an expensive piece of jewelry, why wouldn't there be some record of it? I kept digging through the information I already had. I found another message from Brennan that showed he had discussed the necklace's value before the date he claimed it disappeared. Then I compared his statements. At first, he had said he last saw it in his bedroom. Later, he said he had moved it somewhere else before putting it back. Then he claimed he had discovered it missing from the locked box. 3 different versions, 3 different stories. I opened a blank notebook and wrote every statement beside its date. The differences became impossible to ignore. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to embarrass Brennan. I didn't want revenge that would make me look bitter. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. If Brennan had lied, I wanted the facts to prove it without me having to scream or insult him. I had just finished organizing the timeline when my phone rang. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer. Then I picked up. "Hello." There was silence for a moment. Finally, Hollis spoke. "Marlo, Brennan told us something happened with the necklace that we didn't know about." I sat up straight. "What happened?" Dad took a slow breath. "I think you need to hear this." My hand tightened around the phone. For weeks, Brennan had acted like he had complete control of the story. Now, for the first time, even my father sounded uncertain, and I knew something had finally started to crack. I went back to my parents' house 2 days later. Before I left, Tessa sat with me at her kitchen table and helped me arrange everything in order. I didn't want to walk into that house angry or confused. I wanted to be ready. When I arrived, Brennan was already sitting in the living room. He looked relaxed, almost too relaxed. Mom and Dad sat across from him. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Dad asked me to sit down. "We need to talk as a family," he said. Brennan gave me a small smile. "I think this is a chance for us to put everything behind us." I looked at him. "Then let's start with what happened." He nodded. I asked him to tell everyone his original version of the necklace story. He began talking, but within a minute, I noticed something different. His story wasn't the same one I had heard before. He said he had kept the necklace in a box inside his dresser. Earlier, he had told my parents it was in a locked box somewhere. I opened my notebook. "You told Dad something different." Brennan's smile disappeared. I went through the dates carefully. I showed them when Brennan had discussed the necklace's value. I showed them when he had changed his explanation about where he kept it. I pointed out that his story about when he noticed it missing had changed too. Brennan leaned forward. "You've been keeping notes about me?" "Yes." "That's creepy." "No," I said. "It's what someone does when nobody believes her." Mom shook her head. "Please, both of you. We're family." I looked at her. "That should have mattered when you threw me out." She became quiet. I continued. "You didn't ask me for proof. You didn't ask Brennan for proof either. You simply decided I was guilty." Brennan interrupted. "Because everything pointed toward you. I placed the fabric he had used as evidence on the table. That never proved I touched your necklace." He stared at it. I explained that being near his room didn't prove anything. A piece of fabric didn't prove anything. And asking about the value of something he had shown me didn't prove anything. Dad looked at Brennan. "Is that true?" Brennan didn't answer. I could see the confidence leaving his face. Dad's expression changed too. He finally understood that he had judged me without knowing the facts. Then Brennan suddenly stood. "You were always the one they trusted more." Nobody moved. His voice shook with anger. "You always got Grandma's attention. She trusted you with everything. Dad listened to you. Mom believed you." I stared at him. "So this was about jealousy?" He looked away. That silence told me more than any confession could. For weeks, Brennan had acted like the victim. Now the mask was falling apart, and my parents were finally seeing the person behind. Brennan stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the floor. Dad waited for an answer. "Brennan," he said, "where is the necklace?" My brother didn't respond. Mom wiped her eyes. "Please tell us the truth." After a long silence, Brennan finally spoke. "I moved it. I felt my body go still." He explained that he had taken the necklace out of the family house and given it to someone he trusted. He wanted to find out exactly how much it was worth before making any decisions about it. Dad looked shocked. "You told us it was stolen." "I know." "Why?" Brennan looked at me. "Because I knew Marlo would start asking questions." I frowned. "What questions?" He hesitated. "The family property. The documents. Everything Grandma left behind." I finally understood why he had been so interested in getting control of those things. Brennan admitted he knew I was familiar with some of Grandma's paperwork. He believed I would notice if something wasn't being handled properly. "So you decided to make me look like a thief?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I thought if everyone believed you were dishonest, nobody would listen to you." Mom covered her mouth. "You knew we would believe you?" Brennan looked at her. "Yes." The word seemed to break something inside her. She started crying. "I helped do this to my own daughter," she whispered. Dad looked at me. "I was wrong." I said nothing. He continued. "I should have asked questions. I should have protected you." I wanted to forgive him. Part of me still wanted my father to tell me everything would be okay. But too much had happened. "The worst part wasn't being kicked out," I said. Dad lowered his eyes. "The worst part was watching you choose which child to believe before you even knew the truth." Mom began crying harder. Brennan looked uncomfortable. "I didn't think it would go this far." I looked at him. "You accused me of stealing. You let them think I was a liar. You watched them throw me out. I only wanted to scare you. That's not an excuse." He looked down. "You don't get to call it a scare when you knew exactly what could happen." Nobody argued with me. Brennan eventually contacted the person who had the necklace. Later that day, it was returned. It was never stolen. I had never touched it. The truth was finally sitting in front of all of us. But strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I looked at the necklace on the table and realized it no longer mattered as much as it once had. The real damage wasn't the missing jewelry. It was the trust my family had thrown away so easily. They had placed a price on my word. And when Brennan offered them a story that was easier to believe, they spent my trust without hesitation. I picked up my coat. "I need time," I said. Nobody tried to stop me. For once, I didn't need them to. I didn't move back home. Even after everything came out, I knew I couldn't return to the house and pretend nothing had happened. The walls were familiar, but I no longer felt safe there. I found a small apartment and focused on making my life stable again. I worked harder than I ever had before. Within a few months, I found a better job with steady pay. I paid my own bills, built up my savings, and stopped worrying about whether I could take care of myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of where I was going. My parents started calling more often. Mom asked if I would come over for dinner. Dad asked if I wanted to spend a weekend at the house. I didn't say yes immediately. I needed to decide what I was comfortable with. Eventually, I agreed to meet them for dinner, but I made one thing clear. If we're going to have a relationship again, we can't pretend this never happened. Dad nodded. Mom promised she understood. I also told them I wouldn't accept anyone blaming me for what Brennan had done. There would be no changing the story later. No saying everyone had simply misunderstood. No pretending I had caused the situation. They agreed. Brennan apologized a few weeks later. At first, his apology sounded more like a request for things to become normal again. I just want our family back, he said. I looked at him. Normal disappeared when you decided my reputation was something you could use as a weapon. He became quiet. I didn't hate him. I didn't want to destroy his life. That would have kept me connected to him in another way. Instead, I chose to move forward. That became my revenge. I built a life he couldn't control. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes to see whether he had contacted me. I stopped wondering what my parents thought about me. I stopped trying to prove that I was a good person. The people around me judged me by how I treated them, not by one accusation. My coworkers respected me. My friends trusted me. Slowly, I became comfortable with myself again. My parents noticed the difference too. They began to understand that losing me from their everyday lives was the real consequence of what they had done. I wasn't the daughter waiting outside the family home hoping someone would invite her back. I had my own place, my own income, my own plans. Brennan noticed it most of all. He couldn't make me angry anymore. He couldn't make me desperate for his approval. He couldn't decide how I felt about myself. One evening after dinner, he looked at me and said, "You're different now." I smiled. I had to be. I finally understood something. Revenge didn't have to mean hurting him the way he had hurt me. It could mean refusing to stay broken. The strongest revenge was becoming someone he could no longer control. And that was exactly what I had done. Several months later, I agreed to meet my parents for one last serious conversation. We sat in a quiet restaurant, away from the house where everything had happened. Dad looked older than I remembered. "I failed you," he said. "I treated Brennan's accusation like proof. I should have asked questions before judging you." I looked at him for a moment. "You should have." Mom reached across the table, but stopped before touching my hand. "I was afraid," she said. "I kept thinking that if I admitted Brennan was lying, our family would fall apart." I shook my head. "The family didn't fall apart because you faced the truth. It fell apart because you refused to." She started crying. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because she needed to understand. Brennan arrived a few minutes later. For once, he didn't try to defend himself. He sat down and looked at me. "I was jealous of you for years," he said. I stayed quiet. He explained that Grandma had trusted me with important things. She saw me as responsible, and Brennan hated feeling like he was always being compared to me. "I felt like you were the one everyone could depend on," he said. "I wanted to prove I could control something too." I listened. "I never wanted to compete with you," I told him. "I know that now." His voice broke. I was wrong. There was no excuse this time. I believed that he was sorry. But forgiveness didn't mean pretending the past had disappeared. "I can understand why you felt jealous," I said. "But understanding it doesn't erase what you did." He nodded. Nobody expected everything to become normal that day. We agreed that if we were going to rebuild anything, it would take time. There would be no pressure, no forced family gathering, no pretending. I kept my apartment and my financial independence. I kept the boundaries I had worked so hard to build. I also decided that forgiveness would be something I gave slowly, not something anyone could demand from me. Eventually, I did forgive Brennan. Not because what he did was small. Not because my parents' decision didn't matter. I forgave him because I didn't want his actions controlling my life forever. The necklace eventually returned to its place among the family heirloom. I looked at it once before it was put away. It was strange. For months, that necklace had represented betrayal, fear, and anger. Now it was just a necklace. Its value had never been what mattered most. What mattered was what I learned about myself. I had entered this story believing I had lost my family, but I realized I had really lost the version of my family I thought existed. In return, I gained something I couldn't lose so easily. I gained self-respect. I gained independence. And I learned that betrayal can hurt you without defining you. They kicked me out because they believed my brother's lie. I thought that night was the end of my family. It wasn't. It was the night I finally stopped begging people to see my worth and started living like I already knew it.